I recently did a video on Metal Gear Solid 3. The video would never properly upload, and I've tried several sites which would indicate that it's a file corruption, but that would actually turn out to be somewhat of a blessing in disguise, because I realized that there's also two other Metal Gear titles that I hadn't done videos on yet, and I have no intention of being stuck on Metal Gear Solid forever, so I decided to do a retrospective on the 4 games in the Metal Gear Solid series. Now, Metal Gear Solid 1 was released in 1998 on the PlayStation 1 to the best of my recollection. And it was the game that really sort of set a new standard for cinematic storytelling. The storyline was great, very well told, and the characters really stood out. I mean, the graphics are nothing to really get excited about now, but they were pretty cutting edge at the time on the PlayStation 1. And the voice acting was also fantastic. Now, voice acting had never really been that big of a focus in other games, but because of the quality of the voice work in Metal Gear Solid, voice acting in video games would become a much bigger thing in the years to come. In terms of the actual gameplay, Metal Gear Solid was built around the idea of stealth and infiltration rather than straight-up combat. The idea was you were one man against many, and engaging people in combat was a no-win situation, so your only real option was basically to sneak past everybody. And the way the levels were set up, there was a real strategy to it because, as I said before, you didn't really have the ability to take on that many people at one time and have any hopes of winning. So you really had to survey the surroundings and plot your movements carefully to avoid contact as much as you possibly could. Now, what you can actually do in Metal Gear Solid is somewhat limited by the console that it appears on, but at the time, it was pretty darn impressive for me. And as far as the actual complaint about the story over the gameplay, I have to say that the storyline is so good and well done and well written that I was willing to forgive any real shortcomings in the gameplay department as long as they weren't too massive, which they weren't. All in all, Metal Gear Solid is one of, if not the best games on the PlayStation 1, and will definitely be remembered as one of the top 100 greatest games ever made, period. Now, moving on, Metal Gear Solid 2 was released in 2001, and I have to say that this is where things get a little bit dicey, because I really like this game and I respect its advancements in gameplay, because you can do a lot more in this game than in Metal Gear Solid because of the changing consoles, obviously, but the storyline is a bit out there, to say the least. Now, from what I understand, Hideo Kojima originally intended to put less story in Metal Gear Solid 2 until he found out that the storyline is what people really loved about the first game, so he decided to put more story in there, and he actually admitted himself that he may have overdone it a bit. And I think he did. The storyline in this game is a bit hard to follow in places. It really kind of leaves a lot open to the interpretation of the player. It's not bad through and through, it just gets a bit overly philosophical in places, I think. Also, one of the biggest criticisms of the storyline was the fact that they replaced Solid Snake, the main character and iconic figure of the Metal Gear Solid franchise, with the new character, Raiden. And if you've seen my Metal Gear Solid Raiden video, you'll probably know that I didn't really like this character. Now, from what I gather, Kojima wanted to put a new main character in place that more people could relate to and identify with, and would have emotions and reactions that would be more realistic than Solid Snake's. And I have no problem with that, except for the fact that this guy was just one of the most irritating and annoying characters I've ever seen in any game ever. Constant whining and complaining about everything. I mean, I'm trying to imagine a character that could be even more whiny.
It's not fair.
Oh, yeah. Well, moving on. Anyway, on the gameplay side, Metal Gear Solid 2 really made a lot of improvements. On the PlayStation 2, you were able to do a lot more, and they added several new things, such as actually being able to hang from ledges, aiming in first-person view, and also doing running dives and whatnot. The levels were much bigger, and overall, the gameplay was tons better, and this game was a blast to play. And now, looking back on Metal Gear Solid 2, I have to say, it is the game that I like the least out of the Metal Gear Solid series. That's not to say I consider it to be a bad game. I actually think it's rather good. It just had some issues, like I said, in the story department that it's kind of hard for me to overlook. Okay, now moving on to Metal Gear Solid 3. This was actually released in 2004, I think. I could be mistaken on that, but I think it was 2004. This game was unique in that it was actually set in the 1960s with a heavy sort of James Bond theme to it, which was an interesting direction to take, and I actually think that it worked pretty darn good. This game is also unique in that it doesn't star Solid Snake again. Instead, you play as Solid Snake's genetic father, Big Boss. Now, there wasn't really much known about Big Boss before this point, apart from the fact that he was a legendary soldier, probably the best soldier who ever lived, and he wanted anarchy and chaos to reign over the earth, so soldiers would always have a place to fight. That was all we really knew about him, and the fact that he was Solid Snake's father. In Metal Gear Solid 3, we get to see him as a much younger character and actually see some of the events which shaped him into what he would become later on down the line. And we got to see several other important characters, such as his mentor, The Boss, and Ocelot. Now, Ocelot would obviously become a pretty big character later on down the line, but The Boss would arguably become the biggest character in the Metal Gear Solid timeline, as her actions and influence would forever shape the direction the storyline would take. All in all, if it wasn't for the nostalgic value of the original Metal Gear Solid, I would almost have to say that this game here would take the #1 spot on my list of favorite Metal Gear titles in terms of story. Now, on the gameplay side, I don't really have that much to say about this one, because it's essentially Metal Gear Solid 2 with a few improvements. Now the game is being set in a jungle, which introduces the survival aspect. Now you have a stamina meter, which decreases when you perform strenuous actions, and in order to replenish it, you'll have to hunt for various animals and eat them in order to regain your energy. And you also have to wear camouflage to blend into your surroundings and avoid detection. As this is the 1960s, you don't have all that great technology. The issues I had with this were that switching to your survival viewer where you actually change camouflages takes too long, and it really slows the game down. And also, the same problem would be whenever you would need to actually heal your injuries. You also have to press start, and the transition from the in-game to start is not seamless. It takes a few seconds each time, and it bogs the game down. Apart from that, I don't have any real issues with the gameplay. I think it worked just fine. In short, Metal Gear Solid 3 was almost the perfect Metal Gear title to me. Okay, now moving on to the final game I'm covering, Metal Gear Solid 4, which was released in 2008. And to quote someone I talked to recently, I have to say that what is it with Hideo Kojima and even-number Metal Gear titles that just makes his mind go completely crazy with the story? I don't know. I like Metal Gear Solid 4, but I view it almost in the same sense that I do Metal Gear Solid 2 now. I really like the game, it's just they take some serious missteps in the storyline department, and I've covered the ones I had problems with in previous videos, so I'm not going to focus on those too much. I'm just going to say that they took too many steps trying to explain things logically when they've never really done that before. There were always characters in Metal Gear which had supernatural powers, and how they had those was sort of never really explained. But in Metal Gear Solid 4, they took every possible opportunity to explain as many things as they could with logic, which I didn't think really worked. Overall, I wouldn't call the storyline bad because it's not. It's just a bit too convoluted for me in some places. Now, as far as gameplay goes, I think that this one is a bit better than the other Metal Gear titles because they actually break up the traditional pace of Metal Gear by throwing new things at you, things that you're not really expecting. Although the levels were designed pretty well, and as I said, it's nice that they actually break up the pace and give you something different to do for a change, because you were essentially doing more or less the same types of stuff in all the other Metal Gear titles. And it's nice that you're not really forced to do the same here. All in all, Metal Gear Solid 4 was definitely a very high quality game, and one that I don't have any regrets in owning, and I definitely consider it one of my favorites on the PlayStation 3, but it's going to be a little bit far down on my list of favorite Metal Gear titles. Now, in closing, I'd just like to say that I view Metal Gear as one of the greatest gaming franchises in history, and although the Metal Gear Solid timeline is finished, I would definitely like to see the series continue with new main characters, because I think there's great potential for future stories to be told. And should that happen, I will be there.